The sci-fi movies out there, and they're not using light speed as a ramming weapon as a last resort.
What could possibly go
And all of a sudden,
Okay.
Yeah, it gets used.
Oh,
well, the Hammerhead frigate was
old. You
Corvette.
dropped it a few too many times, like me?
No, my daughter had it in college for a year.
So she dropped it a few too many times.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't mean
I
to.
recognize
It's just
that.
that
I said, now I want
I
my
feel
old
like the
laptop back.
potential was there. And the
There's
problem
a
is
lot.
it's more disappointing because there was so much potential for that to work out.
Well, that's the problem with potential. It's there until you make the thing.
well, I think what helped me
Until you go in.
What
Why
helped
don't you live up to the potential?
What helped to my enjoyment of the movie was I didn't go into any kind of expectation. I like the
Depending
element
on
of
whether
mystery
it's
to try.
pseudo velocity or not.
So
Well, I just felt like they
Are we
reused
streaming it?
Hoth. They reused Hoth. Not they created another ice planet, and I think what they did.
Oh, not that again.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like.
I know what the problem with the previous Death Star was. It was too small.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
they could figure that multi-shot, they could rule the universe.
It's a bigger exhaust port.
how many Death Stars have been?
Yeah, let's.
Or three.
Yeah, star. You know, we gotta fuel up at the next star.
If we just make it bigger, we can. If it wasn't for those darn kids.
And their dog.
Hey, now, that almost sounds like your Battlestar Galactica when we start talking about dogs and.
No, I was referencing Scooby-Doo, actually.
Oh, really? I did. Oh, sorry, I was not even catching
You
that.
didn't get that?
The villain was always going insane at the very end. If it wasn't for those darn kids, I would have gotten away with it.
So my daughters went to see hockey tonight, and some of their friends dressed up as Fred, Velma, Daphne.
Oh,
Yeah, so they didn't have a great day, which is kind of sad.
So
They had a Chihuahua?
That was Scooby.
They had a Chihuahua.
No Scrappy Doo either. We just leave Scrappy out of the whole equation.
I just leave the do out.
I thought we
The
put
do,
I
no
thought we
do.
put I thought we put the Chihuahua in the recycle.
Probably don't want to use that one because that's the teenagers. So up the stairs and the little door, the kitchen one, laundry room one.
You're telling-
If you fall in the swimming pool, just say, "Don't flush."
Okay.
When I go to a costume party, I try
Okay,
to
that
avoid
stream
the-
is on Middle Earth, youtube.com/Middle Earth Radio. That is not the right stream. Why? Okay, and this one it says it is the right channel. What?
What's your name? I'm sorry. My name's Corey. Oh, nice to meet you.
What's your name? Chris. Chris.
Corey doesn't actually have your name. That's a pseudonym.
If you told his real name, you have to know.
Yes, I'm actually a life model.
You're a hard light hologram.
No, I'm not a hologram.
Is it a mental name?
I was gonna say I was an
Hi,
android.
come
Hello,
on.
strangers.
I'm an
Hello,
android
strangers.
of a conscious, alien consciousness. So.
I like hard light hologram.
There's also a comfy couch if you want.
Not the comfy couch. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
It's good to see you guys.
I'm curious, did you see it on Meetup or was it just through the notes being sent to you earlier this week?
We got an email from Meetup. I
Yeah.
don't think we RSVP'd this week. But we got your notes.
Okay, I was just curious whether the other guy who came from Meetup might be here or not.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
No.
So I got something to be pushy about.
So I was
Okay.
reading up on a review about Fantastic Beasts. Have you seen that?
No, not my daughter.
Did you write a book?
It's really good. But they were talking about they
No,
used
it's
the
99
word
cents.
to
Only 11
call
pages.
they call muggles nomads.
All right, I think.
If you think about that, this shows you how English people
Sci-fi.
see American language.
Horror, if you look at it
Because
from a certain
the
point
word
of view.
nomads instead of muggles kind of sounds a little bit what's the word I want to say? It's not very beautiful. It's kind of
That's right.
This is actually
kind
pretty
of,
easy and
That's
straightforward.
right. We like to be very functional.
Kindle Direct.
English.
English.
I just thought you would think
Kindle, I
that
don't use
was
it that much.
appropriate. They're supposed to have a new Fantastic Beasts movie coming out here soon, which I'm looking forward to. I didn't care for the original Harry Potter.
Yeah, I'm
series.
moving everything. My whole house is in chaos because I'm moving all the projects that are scattered in different because I got 6 bedrooms, 2 offices, rec studio, all that.
Yeah.
The trailer. I'm consolidating it down here so that my projects don't mess up the upstairs all the time. And so it's if I'm gonna have a
He's
mess, it'll
cleaning
be
off
down
the
here.
tennis court
But
and the
so I
fountain
got
out front.
psychology and rec therapy here, gaming here, Tolkien here, computer science here. My library's in one location. We're gonna be doing weekly shows for Twitch, so
That way
in
the
March.
goldfish won't get
So getting the
get
studio
disturbed by
all
people falling in.
Consistent.
All right, we're as far as I can tell, we're on the air. So let's go ahead, Brian, if you want to go ahead
Alright, yep.
with the meeting notes.
All right. Well,
The meeting's
do you want
order.
to do your welcome to?
Yes, welcome to the Tolkien Society. I'm the Tolkien
Founder.
Society founder,
President.
president. We're an official style of the UK Tolkien Society. Brian is our secretary, and if everyone wants to go around and introduce themselves briefly, you can just use your first name if you want, or you can use an alias or whatever you want. And the camera's there. And we're at youtube.com/Tolkien Scholars, supposed to be. And our website's tolkienscholars.org. You can tweet us at Tolkien Scholars. We don't really use Facebook much. And then there's also Google Plus, tolkienscholars@gmail.com. And we meet the third Saturday of each month from 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific time.
So tweeting, so rocking.
Okay, so just your name. Want to go around? Go ahead, guys.
Oh, I didn't know where we were
I
starting.
think Hawk started us, so
We'll just skip Chris and go.
Okay, I'm Chris, and I'm a dues-paying member of the Tolkien Society.
My name's Corey, and I'm going to be a dues-paying member someday.
Chris, how long have you been coming to Tolkien Society?
4 or 5 years.
Yeah. And Corey, it's been about a year and a half.
Yeah, something like that.
I'm Brian, secretary, and I think we're up to 9 years that I've been coming.
I'm Stephanie. I'm not happy here.
Yeah, Wesley. I'm Richard. Yeah, I just wandered in off the street and they let me stay.
About 6 years ago.
Hi, I'm Anthony.
We're still feeding.
Hi, Anthony. This is my second meeting. I went to part of the Tolkien meet last summer, I think. So,
That's it.
yeah.
Which table were you at?
Actually, I didn't go for like the board gaming stuff.
Came for the
Came for the meeting.
society, yeah.
Right? So you were here when we had that set up, and
Yeah, I think I read. You guys had me read like a letter from J.R. Tolkien. Or
That's right.
Or something.
thanks for helping out.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, if there's anything else I can do, I would love to help.
Oh, be careful what you offer. Can always use help.
Okay. So yeah, let me just go ahead and read through the notes, and then we'll move on from there. So
Okay, that works.
is it live or is it memorized?
We're live, yeah.
Remember? It's an old record, so I'm old enough to
Now
remember
you
that.
feel old.
It's live? Does that mean the electricity's flowing?
Okay, so December 16, 2017.
Maybe it's empty.
Hawk, Brian, Chris, Corey, and Jeremiah was online, attended. Hawk started the broadcast and introduced our meeting. Chris Cooperstein read the notes from November. We had a discussion of notes, including the new Amazon series and the works based on Middle-earth, between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, that time frame between those two written works by J.R.R. Tolkien. We discussed various thoughts about adaptations from books. We are hardcore zealots, but not all people agree on what they think about adaptations. So then we talked about a Narnia connection. I mentioned the podcast Talking Beasts, which also has comments on some failed attempts to bring Narnia stories to the big screen, as well as hopes for future ones. And good things, there's a title, Good Things Peter Jackson Did. The Ent War was really great, Gollum was well rendered, etc. So there is good, so despite some concerns about what might end up not being as well formed, there is good potential for a series in Middle-earth. Comments from Jeremiah.
Yeah, because of Amazon getting that.
Yep. And then a weekly series. We talked a little bit about the risks and benefits, our hopes for what it would be. And then we kind of segued into talking about music as a theme in Tolkien. And we started actually, you might want to go back and look at the notes if you haven't yet, because I thought it might be of special interest to you. we watched a YouTube clip, Howard Shore and How Music Elevates Story,
No relation to Polly Shore.
on YouTube. Peanut gallery is wide today. So at 58 seconds on, we talked about, he mentioned minor keys and major keys and evoking the mood. We talked about music therapy. Some don't like music if it's manipulating emotions. So when is it good? So when is music a good power that's used and not overused? Talked about leitmotifs and Star Wars themes for different people. Example, documentary Before the Last Jedi. I went to the pre-premiere, so it had 10 minutes of documentary on John Williams and coming up with the score for the new movies. So again, just the idea of soundtracks and all of that, and using that with, of course, the Lord of the Rings movies and Howard Shore's amazing work there. And then at about 4 minutes 50 seconds in, he was talking about the timing being a 3/4 time, and when it transitioned to 5/4 time, and how that was much more dissonant, or it was more, it puts you off. It's much more driving, much more. It's not as soothing as the Fellowship is the main. Other movies with leitmotifs such as Amadeus, Gladiator, Star Wars, and then just basically said about Howard Shore, memorable, rich, powerful music. But leitmotifs are not unique to Lord of the Rings, so various ideas on whether or not this is the best, but certainly we all agreed it was enjoyable. Chris Seaman made a list actually at www.tolkien-music.org, which was about all music that or music that's been generated or inspired by the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit or anything Tolkien wrote over like decades. So this would include
Led Zeppelin,
everything.
Everybody. Yeah.
Exactly. Corey mentioned that metaphor has image associations, whereas music influences us in another way, like a formless idea without image, something like a spiritual structure. I mentioned that's a connection with the way the Valar are in the background, like music. So the Valar are not in the foreground in the Lord of the Rings, and yet they're really presumed. It's still part of the background of the story and of what's going on, and they show up, but it's not always. It's more subtle. And comments from Hawk about Touch the Sound and drum circles. We read from Tolkien's Middle-earth origin story, the Ainulindale, which is at the beginning of the Silmarillion. It's well worth reading if you have not read it before. So we read that. Hawk played Stars of Arda and Discord of Melkor music from his Ea album, available on Synthetic Zen. And then just again, looking at the 4 themes in the Song of the Ainur, which were kind of loosely, the themes would be creation of Arda, the marring of Arda, the rescue of Arda, and then last, the judgment and resolution of the matter by Eru. And then we had discussion on just that, the whole story that kind of is the origin of Middle-earth or Arda, the bigger world. After the music, Iluvatar showed them the world which was the embodiment of the Ainur's music. So after they sang, he showed them what actually that music caused. Melkor's rebellion was, quote, a tributary of Eru's glory. And I mentioned there was a reference to 1 Peter 1:12 in the New Testament. I thought it was kind of cool that related to that about angels. And then where we start next time, since we didn't finish the Silmarillion, now the children of Iluvatar are elves and men. Hogg asks, shall we add a Patreon account for Tolkien scholars? Just getting feedback on that. Would like to know what people think about that for future events, such as Tolkien Moot, which Tolkien Scholars is part of, but obviously Tolkien Moot includes more, as it includes a lot of role-playing, but Tolkien Scholars would definitely be kind of the continuous organization that kind of sponsors Tolkien Moot. So we wrapped it up, had final comments, and the next meeting is January 20th, 2018.
I think that's today.
Thank you, sir. Very much appreciated. Yep. All right, so where do we want to go ahead and begin today?
Should I start with the shameless plug?
Well, okay, so let's maybe just quickly, because it's a new year, the holidays happen, maybe just a quick update on how folks are doing. So we haven't seen you since Tolkien Moot. How have things been for you?
Oh, not too bad.
And we usually try like tie it into Tolkien or literature or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you have any experiences that you could tie in?
Yeah, well, I mean, my love affair with Tolkien kind of began. Well, I was a kid when the Peter Jackson films came out, and as a kid, you don't have much of a critical mind, you know. So I kind of
Just enjoy it. Yeah.
I just enjoy the movies. I still think they're awesome. And then I read bits and pieces of Tolkien when I was young, but I didn't really start reading Tolkien seriously until around college. So I read Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, cover to cover, and then I graduated and moved on to the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales and Children of Urine.
Yeah.
Was there a special ceremony when you graduated?
Yeah. I got a crown. Like Aaron.
Oh, no. You didn't have a special set of elves.
Wow, I didn't get a crown.
But yeah, so I've read most of the History of Middle Earth series by Christopher Tolkien. It's like God amongst men, Son of God. You're the son of a Luke.
We started with last month. We just kind of was it December or November? We kind of just honored him as he's stepping down
Yeah,
officially.
he stepped down from the
Huge.
Yeah,
Right?
I think.
Yeah. So yeah, kudos to him.
Kind of amazing he's still alive.
Well, it's just amazing he stuck it out that long. We're very grateful for all the hard work he did. He gets, some criticism and such, but we're human beings. But
yeah, well, wasn't it
his
him?
overall effort, yeah.
We probably wouldn't have the Silmarillion to read it.
We wouldn't have a fraction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would just be the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. We would miss out on all that glorious beauty. I'm quoting Bruce Lee.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Don't focus on the finger.
Yeah, I didn't think the Hobbit movies were nearly as good as the Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah, they were too prepared for video games.
Yeah, the whole battle of 5 Armies was like a video game.
Was that kind of the big disappointment to you? I mean, did you have high hopes for them or not?
Well,
compared to how well the Lord of the Rings movies were made in comparison to Hobbit.
Yeah, well, nothing's that you can't really beat the originals. Like, nothing can beat the original Star Wars trilogy, for example, because they were the first movies that came out. And it was so ingrained in popular consciousness. And the Hobbit movies, I felt like they were too much. They were too reminiscent of the tone of the Lord of the Rings, which is a much more adult work, whereas the Hobbit's supposed to be more kind of a lighthearted children's fancy tale.
And you tried to push it over into the same thing.
Yeah, especially the extended editions were really long. And the dwarf elf romance I thought was not very well. Ontario.
Yeah, it's really a risky thing to try. It's got potential, but the problem is when you look at Tolkien, he did it very sparingly. I think there were only 3 alliances between humans and elves.
Yeah,
is that right? And so you never hear any between elves and dwarves. So that is quite remarkable.
Well, you did hear about the reverse romances between elves and dwarves.
That would be more like romantic war or the romance of destruction or something. I don't know. Anyway, sorry, Anthony.
No, it's okay. So I thought the Hobbit movie could have been like either 2 movies or even just 1 movie. They probably just made 3 movies to, because the studio.
It did feel a little bit like he was trying to pad his wallet, didn't it?
Oh yeah, totally. Cash grab.
Yeah. Thanks for coming back.
We're so glad
to have you.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
We're always glad to have new volunteer victims. I mean, test subjects. I mean,
Okay, Richard, your turn, and go ahead and do your plug.
So what happened to me on January 11th? I published my first short story on Amazon.com.
Good job.
So I'm now a professional author. Somebody paid me for it.
Awesome.
So
we'll give a very short summary of what it is, genre.
It's a frontier exploration, and the group is trying to make sense of this abandoned planet, and horrible things happen. And it just ends right there because the idea is it's a universe introduction.
Okay.
So.
Cool.
So let's see, we've been good. We've got this cat. You want to talk about the cat?
Sure. We may have already told you guys, but we have 2 kittens, and one is gray, so we named him Gandalf.
Nice.
So you were purchased by a cat?
Yes. And he has a little beard, and
Nice.
It's adorable.
Oh.
But I think that's the only Tolkien-related update on our lives.
Anything major going on just in lives in general, or have things been pretty mellow?
No.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Are you still involved, Wes, with Spark?
Spark had their fundraiser last night, actually.
Yeah, we were running our program there last week.
Oh, yeah.
Yesterday, from 4 to 7 for gaming.
When was their fundraiser?
It was in the evening. It had a bunch of like tables with like desserts and stuff, and so people were getting the spiel for. They actually, this might be relevant. So they had the creators of Myst, who are in some way connected with Spokane.
Really?
Apparently,
Their
they're
office is in Deer Park.
Actually, yeah, I went to school with one of the.
So that's kind of
girls.
cool.
Yeah.
They had them there giving a little talk with a famous author from Spokane, Jess Walter, was like giving them like a little chat, points, and they got to talk about stuff they're doing, and
That's really interesting.
they got, I got to see them in person. So
Creative stuff.
pretty wild. Yeah. So yeah, that's good. I'm still work study at Signum University, and that's growing. I guess they are in, they just started their spring semester here, and so there's lectures by Tom Shippey and Berlin Flieger and some of those kind of stalwarts of Tolkien scholarship, and their annual moot is sometime in June, I think.
And that's the Myth Moot?
Myth Moot this year, its big guest is going to be, I think it's John Garth, Tolkien's War, guy.
Sure.
And I think Douglas Adams.
He's a great speaker, by the way.
The annotated Hobbit, the guy who wrote that, is going to be there too, I think.
Oh, Douglas Anderson?
Anderson, that's the name. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Oh,
not the Hitchhiker's Hobbit.
Yeah, I think he's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he'll be there too, I think.
Hawk, you need to go out there sometime to this Myth Moot.
You should.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'll fit down right in.
Time.
I haven't had any sleep this week.
Sleep is.
Yeah. I'll sleep when I'm dead.
Okay.
Which won't be long if I keep this up.
You really should think about getting yourself a clone.
You know what they say?
No, I saw what happened to Michael Keaton. That's not good.
Hawk, you know what they say? If you don't have your sleep, you don't have anything.
You don't have your health.
Your health.
To paraphrase the Six-Fingered Man.
I forgot to say the title of my book.
Yes, what is it? Kind of hard for people to find it.
Ghosts of Gazebo is the title of the short story.
Okay, and what pen name are you going by?
I'm using my full name.
So we'll tell people.
Richard Ross Baldwin.
Okay.
And it's on Amazon.com.
Yep.
This from the man who says on his I have to tease you, on your recording or your voicemail, if you know who this is, leave a message. But he publishes on Amazon. That's great.
I'm sorry. I won't
No,
know
that's
how to
okay.
begin.
I just think it's hilarious.
Should I use a pseudonym?
It's called cognitive dissonance.
Keep them guessing, man. Keep them guessing. That's right, because that way you keep away the fans from invading your house. All right, so yeah, I mean, really not that much. I guess the only Tolkien-related news I would have is that I'm just growing my skills as a lore master, game master, and my wife has been just rocking it with her embroidery skills. I came up with the idea that I wanted something durable for there's another family that role plays with my family, and so it's like as big as it can be because it's hard when you have 8 people you're trying to run a campaign. It's like I'm breaking all the rules. But anyway, so
somehow Gygax regularly ran 20 players.
That's crazy.
Well,
maybe that was before 5th edition. But anyway, so
maybe he had a staff and he hit the really ones.
Yeah. So anyway, but I thought, well, it'd be nice to have something durable because I'm running the Darkening of Mirkwood campaign, which again is between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and this is actually relevant in the sense that although we want to stick with Tolkien.
You want me to take the corner?
Thank you. With Tolkien work, you can just spread it on the floor. But it's that 60 years in between, which hopefully they'll kind of mine that for the show.
Right. Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
So yeah, if you can just bring that up to us first.
Well, isn't the camera over here?
The camera.
Yeah, I don't care about the camera.
Okay.
Oh,
I care about the live people who are here.
There you go.
All our good friends
It's
online.
not whether or not they find it, it's whether they find fools.
Sorry, I do care about you, but these people are right here. So anyway, so So I did it to scale.
The camera's actually picking it up.
Oh wow.
Okay, so anyway, using that as a locator to help them, so it's not just like a small map, but it's on the big table, and so that on the big dining room table that we're using, we can refer to that and move our people around and so forth and so on.
Excellent.
So it's, and every hexagon is 10 miles. So that's the basic idea.
10 miles?
Wow.
Yeah.
So I know you do not have the space at your house, but Gygax and others, but what Gygax did, because he came from the background of wargaming, is he built a table and filled it with sand, and then shaped it each game before each game session to the terrain necessary. He just filled it with sand, and then he used water to harden or whatever as needed, and then he would put in things to make it as a dungeon, or if it was outdoors or whatever, and just shape the sand each time.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, that was.
So certainly it's interesting.
But it has to be a really strong table because you have not only the sand, but everybody leaning on it and everything.
Oh, yeah. So no, it's more the ambition than I have. But
yeah, no.
Anyway,
space.
It's been fun again. Just working, trying to be consistent within the legendarium of Tolkien's Middle Earth, and it's a sign of respect for me, of the man, and his imagination.
Yeah.
But then, as we've said many times here before, it's that whole other minds and other hands thing, and I feel like in my very small and puny way, I can try to help players
but it
to
isn't
enjoy
small for the people that you're doing it.
Yeah.
It's just as
doing it for the little people.
Well, and it's the little people who end up changing the world.
Who's doing it for you, Anthony?
Oh, my little person.
Ow! Ow!
So this is their demo and Mary
not
discussion,
throw
and
stuff at the
Richard's
new
shorter
people?
than the air.
Yeah.
It got me right where I live.
Oh well,
So,
realize it
Yeah.
crossed to the gazebo.
okay.
Well, I was lucky enough. I didn't get to really comment about it at the last meeting, but there was a guy that we were having a discussion about how Star Wars was influenced by Tolkien's works, and how the trilogy of the Star Wars is based on the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings. But I didn't know if I agreed with him on everything. But very interesting conversation to have.
Interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't an extremely long conversation, but the guy was at Sherry's, and it was in the middle of the night, and there wasn't anybody around, and so he was just standing there, and we were talking back and forth about the Lord of the Rings. And I was telling him that I came here to the Tolkien Society, and he didn't know that we were here. So there, I was trying to make a plug for you.
Do you guys want me to print new cards? Would that be a value? It's like $20 for 250 or something.
Well, the last time we had those was before Corey was here.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah,
Well, anyways,
show
Be
you.
careful not to electrocute yourself while you're trying to make it play.
Yeah, exactly. But what was interesting was that was a couple. I don't remember exactly when that was, but that was definitely a intriguing discussion. But lately, they had a new anime that came out that was based on the Lodos Wars, which is very indicative of role-playing games in the United States back in the D&D days before role-playing became a big thing. Lodos Wars is very what I would call Tolkien derivative, and I just think it's funny that the Japanese are influenced, that Tolkien's influence stretches so far that it influences Japanese anime.
And they did the same thing with Arthur. They had like all these strange Arthurian.
Well, the Arthurian ones they blended.
Right. Well, but they do the same thing. There's like blatant Tolkien, blatant Arthur. It's very interesting.
But
Day Night is sort of loosely kind of.
Okay.
But a lot of their elves are very, very much reminiscent of Tolkien. It's almost like because it's become the standard in the Western world, it's passed over into.
Well, there's kind of two standards in the Western world, though.
Well, I'm just saying
So
that
you're saying we have a double standard?
I've watched a number of anime that have a very Tolkien-esque version of elves, is what I'm trying to say. And it's just interesting to note that his hands stretch. I mean, his
arms go long.
Yes, indeed. His influence is not just of the Western world and their, Beowulf and so forth, but it just shows you how
I
interconnected
I
the
didn't catch it.
things
What do you
are.
mean by two standards?
So
Remember-
prior to
remember not to get
Tolkien,
too
elves.
far off track.
Yeah, well, prior to Tolkien, elves were little fairy
Right.
creatures.
That's what I'm.
Tolkien's elves are very tall
Tinkerbell.
creatures. So two very we have in
Ideas
Western
simplification.
culture. Two
That's what
very
I was
different
getting
types
at.
of elves.
That's what I was saying there.
Yes.
But anyways,
Tinker
it's just
stuff.
interesting to note that in our day of connectivity and the fact that they go to the Western world for kind of like we do them sometimes it's what exotic and strange and whatever and I just think it's funny that Tolkien is essentially an ambassador in showing the Eastern world the mythology of Norse and so on and so forth.
And doesn't it also fit with his argument that rather than allegory, it's applicability? That it is across cultures, right? That they're able to, with very different Eastern philosophy and perspective from the Western philosophy perspective, still find that universal human experience through his, fantastical expression of that.
Well, I mean, it just shows. I mean, how many languages has the Lord of the Rings been translated into? I mean, just shows you
Has
the.
it been translated into Klingon?
Yes, it has. Sadly, I know this. Yes.
You appreciate it. You meant the original Klingon.
Can we just finish around? Maybe I don't mean to.
I don't mean to.
No, you're
take
fine.
all
I
the
just
time.
think everybody has
Keep
a
us on
chance
agenda
to.
there, Mr. Secretary.
So we're just reviewing how everybody's year's gone. Thanks, Corey, for that's an interesting connection. And Chris, did you have anything to add to your?
Well, I started my children on The Magician's Nephew.
Oh, nice. So, C.S. Lewis, a friend of Tolkien.
Yes. And
So you're reading The Magician's Nephew, not the Lion of Witch and Warrior?
no, because The Magician's Nephew is
It's a
first,
prequel. Yeah.
first in the chronology, not in the order written.
That's kind of what I was wondering.
Yes. And it's interesting that you see connections that start to form. Lewis uses fairy dust from Atlantis, which would have shown
All the best things come from
mythology. So a lot of the mythology, a lot of the mythos, and then as you get into the creation of the world with song, same thing.
Well, when they were the
Yeah,
Inklings, and they were
Aslan,
sharing
Narnia.
with each other. Yeah.
Yes, so I'm just picking up on a lot of shared story.
Yeah, so let's see other influence suggest. Wonderful. Of course, Atlantis and the Lord of the Ring, or the Middle Earth legendary would be Numenor. So there's Atalante is also one of the same. So.
Yep.
Hawk?
Well, usual 1001 things
Where do
for
I
usual
start?
projects, but I won't run on that. On the RPG side, so we were just at Spark Central yesterday. Due to traffic, I wasn't able to bring down the usual Adventures in Middle-earth setup, but the other volunteers, I'm trying to get stepped up to run more. So Charles ran Star Wars, and Danielle ran No Thank You Evil, which is for the little types. What usual battle between trying to get them peeled off the video game screens to socialize and interact. And we had a lot of kind of churn this time just because they had to go and things like that. And the fundraiser, a couple of the girls were torn because they were they painted with little handprints and all over saying thank you sponsors on a big huge banner. And so they were going back and forth between that and playing Star Wars. The one little girl was like, Star Wars? Oh, yes! So excited. And she's like dragging this older girl with her. The other girl's like, okay, yeah, whatever, was okay with it. But it was good. And Charles was doing a good job with the narration. We are meeting Tuesday with Erica. She's the director, right?
She does events and things. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So they're talking about bumping us up to either weekly or every other week now, because they really want to see a lot more of this verbal socializing than the screen stuff.
Sure.
They're really getting a little frustrated with what's happening with screens and keeping them from doing all the other activities, and really trying to change that dynamic a little bit.
Yeah.
So Tuesday at noon, I'm meeting with her and Wilson
Oh, yeah.
to talk about taking it to the next stage with that. So that's good news. And the kids literally were saying, "Can't we do this every week? Can't we do this every week?" So, and it does flow a lot better. You get that connected story, and the monthly stuff is tougher to remember between, which my research supports. The wheelchair-friendly RPG trailer now has graphic artwork on the back. We finally, out of 18 different artists, picked the winning artist, and then last week got a big wrap on the back of it. And so it's people sitting around a table with their imaginations visualized overhead. It's pretty cool. So just in time for Monday, we're going to be at Hasbro Wizards of the Coast Dragon Talk show. We're interviewed by them for half an hour on RPG research, RPG therapeutics, etc., etc. So that's really exciting, and I've been spending way too much money on artists and promo stuff getting ready for that. But we're excited to be doing that Monday. And whenever I bring up the gaming stuff, gaming owes incredible amounts to Tolkien. So just bringing that up, that like in the original Dungeons and Dragons, the first role-playing game, you had hobbits, not halflings. You had ents, not treants. You had Balrogs, not Baelors. But then they got in trouble for copyright, so they had to change the names. But right from the beginning, it was irrefutable the Tolkien influence on the evolution of role-playing games existing as a recreation thing. They didn't exist before 1974. So Tolkien is indelibly in role-playing games and affects a lot of style. One of the things we really try to emphasize at Spark Central is the heroic play. Right? We have behavior modification built into the game systems, like with AIM, they gain shadow if they do bad things, and they gain inspiration if they do good things, and they have fellowship foci, so that if something bad has happened to somebody else, they start to feel miserable, and they have game mechanic penalties because their character feels so bad about their best friend, suffering in some way, and trying to there's empathy, encouragement, and behavior modification built into it in a very healthy way. And great. I won't do it, but great stories from last month and such about some hardened kids that came in, and an hour and a half, one of them was crying and such, in a good way. And I was like, just amazing to watch. It also reminds me of when we were reading the Kalevala, especially Clerval, and how we read through Clerval, and he did all these terrible things. And we didn't care because Clerval was a jerk. And he'd go, "Why did everything bad always happen to me?" And you're like, "Because you're bad. You're doing terrible things. And you have no redeeming qualities." Because the old Finnish Edda were just taught to be moral stories to tell kids, don't do this or else this will happen. But then Tolkien rewrote it as Turin Turambar in the Silmarillion. And Turin Turambar, you feel bad for him because the motivations tweaked just a little. The same events happen. He sleeps with he marries a sister, he does all these, kills such and such, does some pretty bad stuff. But it's there's a twist of not knowing and memory wiped by the dragon and things like that, so that it's actually a compassionate character and you can empathize and sympathize with the bad things happening to him. Man, this is the unluckiest dude on Middle Earth. That you did not get from Clerval. It's just those little tweaks that completely change that emotive experience. So anyway,
not to mention the second talking inanimate object in Middle Earth, besides William's talking purse, which is Turin's sword.
Oh right, yeah, and the intelligent sword thing, which goes back to Norse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, you talk about talking swords, and the only thing I can think about is the Bugs Bunny sketch.
Well, Journey Quest they have. So Journey Quest is a talking sword, and it's an intelligent sword that can control him.
Exactly.
And it.
You mean William Tell?
No.
But Journey Quest, which is a fantasy adventure, there's a talking sword, and the wizard gets it by accident, and he can barely hold it, and the sword pulls him around. And it's a rude, snarky sword, so it's always chewing him out.
I don't know why, but it makes me think of the singing bush.
Yes. So anyway, lots of great stuff going on. We're going to be at ZoeCon February 16th to 18th in Bellevue, speaking there, and so looking forward to that. Canceled the trip in May to Boston. It's just going to be too expensive and too time consuming. So that's a relief in a way because that was really hard to prepare for. So again, I ask about, because I haven't really heard back from anybody, do we want a Patreon set up for Tolkien Society, or do you think yeah, don't bother. It's not worth it. Not something anybody would support. The way Patreon works is you either have a deliverable that people pay for, like an album, and people will pay, and then when the album's done, they get a free album because they help support it. Or you do a monthly subscription, anything from like $1 on up, and then that just helps us cover things. We used to meet at coffee shops. I've still debated doing it in the trailer, and when you get the better trailer with more room, showing up at different locations to make it more accessible to more people.
I do know that on Twitch and YouTube, there's a movement to Patreon to get consistent income for them so that they can concentrate on their work rather than having to constantly ask people for money during their broadcasts.
Right, yeah, and I use Patreon already with RPG Research, and so they get special access. They have access control to our chat server and to different broadcasts. That's controlled through this, so that way donors get early access. I believe in making it all free for everybody eventually, but if you want to do it in a tiered way that they get early access, that's a way to thank them and such. And then also, as I was just saying, like a couple of us have bumper stickers that I ran years ago that just say Tolkien Society, Tolkien Society with their website.
One of the best ways to spread the
Yeah, is anybody else interested in bumper stickers? They're not expensive to run another print run. Would you be interested?
Yeah.
Anybody else? No?
I don't like stickers.
Yeah,
Or a couple of
business cards. I could do another print run of business cards, and the business cards had all of our Tolkien projects. So it had Tolkien Society, Tolkien Moot, the convention, Other Minds Magazine, Middle Earth Radio, Middle Earth Talk, which is Michael and I need to do some fresh ones of that. At this point, it just needs Tolkien Moot to get that added to on one card.
I would just, my 2 cents is I think the Patreon idea is a good one, especially because we've talked a few times about the possibility of doing Tolkien in the future of Bozarth Mansion.
Right, which is $4,000.
Right, and so here's the thing. I think that we could do that if we were able to save up for it through Patreon. And I think the additional benefit would be that maybe, along with kind of the normal structure of Tolkien, maybe in the past, I know when you did more than one day, there were like a couple of different times when you could do a non-RPG thing, such as, hey, we've always kept the guest speaker, but like having other things, special
musicians,
and
Elvis singers.
So I'm just thinking, somebody who might be interested in coming, but not maybe for the role playing.
Yeah.
But hey, maybe there would be a longer piece that would be longer than our, I don't know. It'd be
we
fun
used to have
creatively kind of play around with that.
Yeah, we used to have 3 days. It was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so there was an opening event, like gaming would start like noon or whatever for the hardcore ones. And then 5 to 6 or 7 would be an event, the opening event, opening ceremonies, opening speaker or singer or whatever. And then 7 to whatever would be more gaming. And then Saturday we would have something, an event, an opening event at the very beginning, 8 or 9 a.m., another event around noon or 1 o'clock, broadcast and whatever, and another event around 5 to 7 on Saturday. So it'd be like 3 of them on Saturday. And then Sunday we'd have another 1 or 2 events to wrap up. We always had to wrap up on Sunday, usually by 3 to 5 p.m. because some people had to fly back to like Germany and stuff. But it used to cost me, when we did this at hotels and so I was spending anywhere from $3 to $10 grand a year for each event, and I wasn't charging anything because I was trying to avoid hassle from Tolkien. Not Tolkien. Middle Earth Enterprises now. But if it's done more as donations and such, I think that's where we're okay.
Was Bozarth Mansion Hawk? Was that for the weekend or just 1 day or 2 days?
That was a weekend.
That's pretty good.
That was like we could start like Friday 5 p.m. or whatever, Friday, Saturday, Sunday,
and have
the whole campus. Right. The entire. There's 46 boardroom.
Bedroom.
Well, they've been like college dorm rooms. There's 46. Yeah, there's dorm space for 46 people included in it.
So people from further away that would want to come in for
it, and they would only have to pay like $25 a night or something.
Easy
so way cheaper than a hotel.
Yeah.
Big, huge kitchen, multiple ovens, and everything in the main central thing. It's meant to run weddings and conventions. It was originally a retreat. And so outside it can handle like 200 people in the court, this beautiful courtyard. And then interior, we estimated about 100 people for gaming and things like that. So special events for the larger stuff outside. And We do it in July, so the weather's usually
And you,
hot, but good.
correct me if I'm wrong, Hawk, but that has to be reserved kind of way ahead in advance.
A year or two minimum.
So I'm curious. So
With a deposit.
last Tolkien Moot was Tolkien Moot 13.
Yes.
Would it be still potentially possible for Tolkien Moot 15?
Because 14's coming this year.
Yeah.
It would be possible for 15. We would have to put like $1,000. I think we put a $500 deposit.
Uh-huh.
So we did do this years ago in
Yeah.
2010, 2012. I had gotten together. Michael gave 500. I put like 1,000. We got enough that we had like $1,500 down on it, and I was saving up for the remaining amount. And we had people signing up, and then that's when I got really, really sick in 2012, and I could not function, so I had to cancel the whole thing. Now, there's a clause in there you don't get a refund. I explained the illness thing, and they kindly gave back all the money, so I gave it back to Michael.
Wow.
So that was really nice.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to chance that again.
No.
So if we were doing it, we'd have to be full
Yeah, you have to
committed,
commit
and I'd have to have the budget.
So there's an interesting. I'm just putting this out there that I would say, why not start the Patreon and then just see over the next say 5-6 months between now and the beginning of summer, see how we do and say, hey, actually has enough been raised by this that can actually cover,
if we get
the down payment.
$5-10 a month from enough people, it adds up quickly.
And if that covered, say, the down payment for the next summer in 2019.
Yep.
So that's just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So I can do that. It doesn't cost anything to set up an account. And we already have a dedicated savings account for the society. We haven't incorporated as a nonprofit, but we're a de facto nonprofit. We operate as a nonprofit. We just haven't gone through all the expense and all that. I've been going through all that with RPG Research.
Sure.
It's more expensive to be a nonprofit than a for-profit.
Sure.
And I don't mean because of money coming in. The government charges you more to be a nonprofit. All the paperwork I have to do every year and all the filing is much more burdensome. So for this, since we're small enough, we would just do it as a de facto nonprofit. But yeah, so okay, then let's pretend we're bored here. Who is for Patreon set up for Tolkien Society? Aye. Any names? Any names? Okay, cool. Well, then I will make that happen for everybody. Thank you for your input.
Sure.
It's in Laughlin. Okay.
So so we need to decide whether we would like to continue on with reading the rest of the Silmarillion now, or if we want to go to one of the letters of Tolkien, which in the past we often would do, and we've kind of taken a break from that.
Let's check if anybody had any topics they wanted to bring up, because we have to be careful.
Sure, absolutely. We want to keep relevant.
Did you have any topics you had in mind?
Not really. Well, I guess one of the long-standing questions I've had is it's not really important or anything, but did Tolkien's elves have pointed ears?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah. Anybody want to comment on that?
Wasn't there a comment that the word leaf is somehow related to ear in one of his language connections? And I think that's the reason why there's always been the assumption that the ears were pointed.
I've heard rumors to that effect.
Well, kind of like
I haven't seen the citation.
the pixie from Disney myth always had pointed ears, and it was just
Right, how
kind
much
of
is a
assumed
legacy
that-
from that?
that Tolkien's elves were pixies large.
Right.
Well, Tolkien didn't really like it, and I think.
Yeah, he was vociferous about that.
And was there some sort of connection between like lembas bread and maybe some pointed ears? I think I read some either one
No,
of those letters.
Actually, one of the peoples of Middle Earth has a short thing on lembas bread, and it was sacred corn from the Undying Lands
Oh, okay.
that it was made from. That was quite interesting.
They were shipping them away.
Any other comments on that?
No, they brought
Are you guys
seeds
looking
up.
something up on that?
I'm looking up other places around Spokane that might be a good place to host a big event.
Okay.
They all just look like normal homes, but there's
Right.
like 11 bedrooms for $500 a night.
Right.
There's always the Tolkien, the Hobbit Hole over in
That would be a cool
place
place,
in-
to have it.
is it up by?
You talking about Montana?
No, the other one
The retreat, the bed and
one-
breakfast one over in the
in the middle of the state.
Cascades.
Yeah,
But it's tiny.
is it?
It's a tiny B&B thing.
Oh,
It's more of an Airbnb
I
place.
see.
It's tiny. You have to hike up to it too.
so the Montana one's
There's no
bigger than,
road
isn't
to
it?
The Montana one sold, I think.
Is it?
It was up for sale, and Middle Earth Enterprises was not willing to renew the license. So it couldn't be called the Shire anymore and all of that once it was sold. Yeah, that was unfortunate because we were hoping to do it out there at some point. But.
So the question though, we got off track. The question about the ears.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to? Would you have any kind of reference? I don't know. That's the way I've heard it connected was the leaf. The word leaf is connected to the ear, and that was the reason why I considered it pointed. So.
Well, let's consult our favorite and recurring Tolkien scholar, Michael Martinez, because he has commented on this. Question: do Tolkien's elves have pointy ears? Short answer: no. And longer answer: no. Tolkien's elves do not have pointy ears. However, we tolerate these endless debates about whether Tolkien's elves had pointy ears because, well, I don't know why anymore. At no time during his life did J.R.R. Tolkien publish anything that said elves had pointed ears. Arguments for pointed ears on Tolkien elves have a handful of texts. What was that?
So it was Star Trek.
So it was Vulcans and Star Trek.
Yeah.
The arguments for what's that? I heard somebody.
Vulcan's copyright.
Arguments for pointed ears on Tolkien elves take a handful of texts out of context. Tolkien's fiction distinguished between elves and men by their voices and eyes, and kind of their glow almost. Tolkien's own private notes largely discount the idea. Vanished projections of pointed elvish ears appeared long before Tolkien's linguistic notes were published. To date, so this is 2011, no stories written by J.R.R. Tolkien have been published in which his elves are described as having pointed ears.
Except
They're
rabbits.
What's that?
Rabbits have pointed.
There are no references to elvish ears in any published Tolkien story. When fans ask if Tolkien's elves have pointed ears, people usually refer to two controversial texts that were never integrated into any of J.R.R. Tolkien's stories. The first text is taken from letter number 27, which Tolkien wrote in March or April 1938 in response to the Houghton Mifflin Company, who had asked for drawings to be used in the American edition of Hobbit. I am afraid, if you will need drawings of hobbits in various attitudes, I must leave it in the hands of someone who can draw. My own pictures are an unsafe guide. The picture of Mr. Baggins in chapters 6 and 12, the very ill-drawn one in chapter 19, is a better guide than these in general impressions. I picture a fairly human figure, not a kind of fairy rabbit, as some of my British reviewers seem to fancy. Fattish in the stomach, shortish in the leg. A round, jovial face, ears only slightly pointed and elfish. Hair short and curling, brown. So this is about hobbits. The feet from the ankles down, covered with brown hairy fur. Clothing, green velvet breeches, red or yellow waistcoat, brown or green jacket, gold or brass buttons, a dark green hood and cloak belonging to a dwarf. Actual size, only important if other objects are in picture. Say about 3 feet or 3 feet 6 inches. The hobbit in the picture of the Gold Hoard, chapter 12, is, of course, apart from being fat in the wrong places, enormously too large. But, as my children at any rate understand, he is really in a separate picture or plane, being invisible to the dragon. There can be no doubt that Tolkien pictured his hobbits as having pointed ears. Slightly, but he specifies. So that, if that anybody was going to ask that, hey, we're covering that as well.
But when he used the word elvish, I think he was
He did
trying
in quotes.
Right.
But he was talking about in no way are his elves.
Right, see, but it was
like
the
rabbits.
popular elvish idea that he was
But he's talking about the hobbits.
Right, and
Yes.
he was talking about hobbits,
Yes.
but when he used the word elvish,
Not his elves.
he was talking about the popular elvish of the day before.
Right.
Why would he make that reference if he didn't want it to be confused?
There can be no doubt that Tolkien pictured his hobbits as having pointed ears. The best representation Tolkien himself drew of Bilbo is in the picture of the Eagle's Eyrie, where Bilbo is waking up. We can clearly see Bilbo's elongated ear. Allowing for Tolkien's own self-deprecation, we can argue that the elongation might be unintentionally exaggerated, or perhaps intentionally so for emphasis. As there is no controversy regarding the shape of hobbit ears, people quickly fall to debating whether the hobbit ears are an acceptable reference for the shape of elvish ears, based on the letter cited above. There are two problems with using the letter to argue that Tolkien's elves have pointed ears. First of all, no Tolkien biographer or researcher has established that anyone at Houghton Mifflin Company had ever seen a Tolkien picture or story depicting elves with pointed ears. Secondly, the adjective elvish, in quotes, is attested in widespread use going back at least to Shakespeare's time.
Right.
The Etymology Online Dictionary says the word goes back to the 14th century, 1300s England, well before Shakespeare. Hence, we can neither show that the Houghton Mifflin Company employees would have had any knowledge of Tolkien's elves, other than what is given in the text of The Hobbit, nor that Tolkien himself was using elvish in any way to reference details from his own stories. Now, we don't have to leave the discussion with The Hobbit. There is another famous painting Tolkien made called Beleg Finds Gwyndor in Tar Nufuan, in which the Sindarin Noldoran elf Beleg finds Gwyndor of Nargothrond sleeping in the woods. Technically, the second elf, not pictured here, is Flinding and Beleg. It's Flinding, and Beleg is a Noldor. Christopher Tolkien suggests the painting was made in 1927 and 1928, the Book of Lost Tales Part 2, Torbar and the Polonoka. It's very difficult to examine the figures in sufficient detail. He's got a big zoom. This is on middle-earth.zenite.org/do-Tolkien's-elves-have-pointy-ears.
Oh, what's the point of the hyphen?
But if you just do Michael Martinez elf pointed ears, you'll get this article.
Sort of.
Yeah.
It's a love-hate relationship.
So but looking at the image, it's very difficult to examine the figures in sufficient detail to see their faces, much less their ears. Flindling Gwyndor's face is hidden, but as you can see here, Beleg's face is bearded. So this painting does not help resolve the question. Do Tolkien's elves have pointed ears? As an aside, aren't Tolkien's fans convinced that his elves are beardless? Still, we cannot see enough of Beleg's ear to know if it is pointed or not.
More beards on elves.
I think didn't Carrie down the shipwright have it?
Yes, he did. He did. Booyah.
Not
Nice.
the movie. I think it's
I just- Yeah, I always thought it was interesting because when Tolkien refers to Elrond, you get a sense that he's this warrior, and the way they kind of come off with Elrond is, I personally didn't like the depiction in the movie because he didn't seem like a warrior so much as he felt like an authority figure. Yeah, he was an authority figure, but he didn't seem like a seasoned warrior that had seen battle over the years. And personally, I feel like the lack
he needed more salt?
something like that.
Well, the thing about that, of course, is that it'd be hard to judge because even a seasoned warrior who, as an elf, is now, 1,000 years on from the Great War, at least.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Well, actually, 3,000 years after the Great War. I mean, at this point, he's known as a wise, person. So
Scholarly, yeah.
you could kind of, in a sense, the earlier Elrond, probably.
Yeah, when he's young and hot-headed.
Yeah,
Well, what I'm trying to say is that if he had a beard or if he had, at least some scars or something to show that he'd been in a fight, that the fact that elves may not have aged, but they still had stuff that happened in terms of sorrow that would have affected their countenance to a point where it would have.
Elrond was half elven.
Right, he was half elven, but he chose the elvish path.
Right.
Any comments from you?
Yeah.
So,
He might have. I was
Beard
trying
is
to
still
imply
there.
he might have his human heritage might have given him a beard, whereas that might be not.
But that's the whole point, that beards could happen, like Círdan, the shipwright, actually did have a beard.
So, lacking any evidence of a pointy-eared elf in this painting, we have to overcome the fact that Beleg has a beard in order to rationalize or justify using this image to argue that Tolkien's elves have pointed ears. In fact, the whole bearded elf debate was thrown for a loop by Vinyar Tengwar, which I have a bunch of those down here. But that is another story. Still, some people remain convinced that Tolkien's elves have pointed ears. Why? The last piece of evidence that people use to argue for Tolkien's elves having pointed ears is an entry from the Etymologies, a pre-Lord of the Rings glossary of elven words that Christopher Tolkien published in The Lost Road and Other Writings. Las, one. Lasse, leaf. This is what you were referencing earlier.
Yeah.
Quenya, Lasse. Noldor, Lachos. Quenya, Lasalanta, leaf fall, autumn. Noldor, Las, Tlaspelen or Lasequelene. I hope I'm not totally butchering it. Our Finnish viewers can help me on that. Quenya Narquelian or Quel, Los Gallen Greenleaf, gnome name of Laurelin. Some think this is related to the next and lasse or ear. The Quendian ears were more pointed and leaf-shaped than human. Los, entry 2. Listen. Noldoran, la, ears of one person. Old duo lasu, whence singular lewig. Quenya la lasta, listen. Lasta, listening, hearing. Lastalaika, sharp ears. A name, and then Noldor lachleg, or Lothron, hearer, listener, eavesdropper. Lansro undo,
I ain't dropping
Lothro, Lothrondo, listen in or eavesdrop. Well, this seems pretty convincing, doesn't it? The expression, quote, more pointed ears and leaf-shaped than, quote, clearly implies some measure of pointedness. However, Christopher was not sure that his father had written human at the end of the sentence. It's hard to imagine what else could go there. But there is no need to quibble over Christopher's guess. Human ears can indeed seem very pointed. Tolkien surely had opportunity to notice as much. And then Michael shows photos of people with pointed ears naturally.
Yeah, I have noticed that some people seem to have almost
different shapes,
what
sure.
we consider an elvish ear.
But there's still one problem. Not one of Tolkien's stories mentions elvish ears. So, if you're looking for proof that Tolkien elves have pointed ears, you won't find any. In fact, in every passage where characters or the narrative single out any particular elvish features about elves in Tolkien stories, the references are to either the elves' faces or their eyes. As an example, in Non-i-Hurin, Unfinished Tales of Númenor and Middle-earth, we read the following. In this way, Sador would speak to Turin as he grew older, and Turin began to ask many questions that Sador found hard to answer, thinking that others nearer akin should have had the teaching. And one day Turin said to him, was Lalaith indeed like an elf child, as my father said? And what did he mean when he said that she was briefer? Very like, said Sador. For in their first youth the children of men and elves seem close akin. But the children of men grow more swiftly, and their youth passes soon. Such is our fate. Still not sure if Tolkien's elves do or do not have pointed ears. In the essay Laws and Customs Among the Eldar, published in Morgoth's Ring, Tolkien wrote, the Eldar grew in bodily form slower than men, but in mind more swiftly. They learned to speak before they were 1 year old, and in the same time they learned to walk and to dance, for their wills came soon to the mastery of their bodies. Nonetheless, there was less difference between the two kindreds, elves and men, in early youth, and a man who watched elf children at play might well have believed that they were the children of men, of some fair and happy people. For in their early days elf children delighted still in the world about them, and the fire of their spirit had not consumed them, and the burden of memory was still light upon them. This same watcher might indeed have wondered at the small limbs and stature of these children, judging their age by their skill in words and grace in motion. For at the end of the third year, mortal children began to outstrip the elves, hastening on to a full stature, while the elves lingered in the first spring of childhood. Children of men might reach their full height, while Eldar of the same age were still in the body like to mortals of no more than 7 years. Not until the 50th year did the Eldar attain the stature and shape in which their lives would afterwards endure, and for some 100 years would pass before they were full grown. Now, if you've made it this far, you are probably in doubt or perhaps convinced one way or another, or waiting for the next point in an endless litany of tit for tat.
The next point.
You don't have to accept that Tolkien elves do not have pointed ears, but we can also point to Tuor and Aragorn looking like elven lords in the stories, and Prince Imrahil, and people will still point to that entry in the etymologies. A work to which Tolkien returned less and less often in the years after he published The Hobbit. To be honest, if you're still asking or arguing that Tolkien's elves have pointed ears, you have probably missed the real point of all this. J.R.R. Tolkien came to the conclusion that his elves never had pointed ears. If J.R.R. Tolkien could not make up his mind, there is no way anyone else can establish the canonical facts on the matter. So the next time you see someone ask if Tolkien's elves are pointy ears, just smile knowingly. You're glimpsing the beginning of the journey. Perhaps it will lead here, perhaps somewhere else.
Take that,
Weren't
Peter
the elves,
Jackson.
wasn't the elves considered though more capable in sight and hearing? Their senses were greater, and I'm not saying that it necessarily applies that you have to have pointed ears, but if you're writing a story, sometimes to give indications of such things, having pointed ears kind of gives you the sense that they might have a heightened sense of hearing. Okay, you see what I'm saying?
As long as they're not the sideways ears that try to be bad.
Here's a little PS in bold. But what about the Tolkien Society FAQ page? The Tolkien Society's official FAQ page says, on the basis of the faulty arguments disproved above, that Tolkien's elves have pointed ears.
Heretics!
That just means the Tolkien Society is wrong.
Michael.
Michael has no trouble.
No, he doesn't. I actually think that the whole debate, which I agree is not conclusive in Tolkien's work, what it raises more, I think the more important question is, why would Westerners conceive of elves with pointed ears? And I think that I would go back to
fairy tales.
I would go back to looking at how gnomes, which is what he called
initially the Noldor,
he called the Noldor gnomes first.
Right.
Gnomes, elves, sprites, even
he borrowed
even my
from
Norse
those
ancestors,
old
the
names,
trolls. And to say the question before, you have even drawings or depictions of these, like how did people imagine them, and why would they imagine them with, say, different features than human beings? And I think it goes back to this idea that they're different, and so the sense in which they're somehow other, they're somehow alien, and yet they are still inhabitants of our world. They're hidden, they're secret, they're special. There's something non-human about them, and so different characteristics are kind of altered in that imagination, and so in the telling of stories, and it makes sense that in the drawing, you sit down to draw. How are you going to draw a troll? And even a troll, now we think of trolls a certain way now because of, maybe movies we've watched. But, if you look at like a Scandinavian troll, it's very different. And then if you look at the movie with trolls and their hair, that's a whole other thing itself. So it's like nobody
which they premiere or they star in Dirk Gently's second season.
Oh,
Dirk
nice.
Gently's
And also in they also feature in Marvel. Oh, come on, help me out here.
You mean the Thor series?
No, it's the space.
Guardians
of the Galaxy. They just got a little troll. But no, my point is that nobody can agree on what a troll is. But we know that word just conjures up, all these non-human associations, most of which are very stocky. Whereas elves are the other kind, and yet not wraith-like, because we understand that goes back to, as Tolkien, got at the idea of writhe, that there's something unnaturally twisted and undead about it. So I think this is really interesting because I don't think we're going to be able to prove it one way or the other.
Yeah.
I don't think it's wrong to depict elves with pointed ears, but you certainly can't prove that they had.
I think artistically speaking, though, an elf having a pointed ear, as you pointed out, makes them a little more non-human.
Exactly.
It implies that they have enhanced hearing. I'm not saying that Tolkien was right or wrong. I would love to say that the fans are giving them a little bit of latitude there because he didn't care about ears in some ways. He really cared about.
We're gonna wrap this up. I'll give others everybody a chance if you'd like to comment.
Google a cursory look at Google for images of leprechauns.
That's what
shows a complete mixture between no pointed ear leprechauns and pointed ear leprechauns. So
that you're controlling your
what
variable.
gives?
What gives? Yeah. That's a very good point. This goes deep into mythology and
Yes.
long ago.
Any last comments? on
Oh,
this?
I think. Well, I just asked that question because it was just
Yeah, that's great.
bugging me for a little. I think like all questions of art, it has kind of a subjective answer because everyone has their own different conceptions of what different creatures or whatever look like, and I think it's still helpful for at least in adaptations of Tolkien's work for elves to have pointers, just to distinguish them more from regular humans or men, and it gives them kind of more of a regal stature, and so yeah.
Okay.
But thanks for answering the
Last
question.
comments on this topic?
Good question, man.
I don't think we can go one way or the other because if he doesn't specify they have rounded ears, maybe he just took it to mean like if I use the word elvish, they know it has pointed ears.
I don't think it was central to his stories, so I don't really cared.
That's true too.
But the beard, I think the beard thing is interesting too.
Yeah.
Well, that's what
I'm
I
sure
thought
Michael has
was.
a separate article on that.
I feel like there's
Does he
an
have an article on
Apollo,
everything?
the bearded Apollo. I don't know how much you know about Greek mythology, but the bearded or non-bearded Apollo is kind of the attitude that really is being pressed upon the elves here. Is that the Western people are holding up this kind of sanitized human being for having youth, So Elrond looks, Elrond doesn't look like he's a man who's had hundreds of years of experience and so forth. He comes across as being, this beardless.
Well, that we could
It has
maybe
a
let's
lot-
let's put that for a discussion, for research and discussion next month. Like,
Sure.
see what something about bearded elves,
I have one more comment.
Okay,
I think it has a lot to do with our standards of beauty.
which are changed from decade to decade.
The predominant standard for a man, a beardless man, is kind of considered more attractive than a bearded.
That's changed a lot in the last decade. Beards have come back. Since
Yeah.
the 70s. We had a long period there in the 70s where it was predominantly hairy, and then 80s through 90s and early 2000s that was considered untrustworthy and shady. And
Yeah, I guess
now,
that's what I'm
now
thinking
the
of.
whole
I grew up in
bearded thing has come back again.
Yeah,
and
but
with a
Peter
vengeance.
Jackson's almost near effeminate, version
He has a beard.
You meant the elves?
of the elves
Right, yeah.
is bothersome to be,
Okay.
in my
Let's
opinion.
shelve that for today.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's a valid
research
point.
it.
It's a
Get
valid-
citations and such for
It's
next
a valid
month.
point, but I think otherwise we'll just go
Next
in a
month,
big
yeah.
circle around the whole time.
So will we continue with the Ainu Lindale? Was that
That's what I would
Okay,
suggest. But
where
it's
did-
okay?
Unless somebody had another. Did you guys have a topic you want to discuss this month?
No, music sounds good.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm with you on that.
Oh, hopefully.
Chris, did you have a topic you want to discuss this month? Okay. Richard,
Nothing comes to mind.
Okay,
I'm not
Cor-
keen on music, but that's good.
What?
did you have a specific topic you wanted introduced to this month, or you're good with
No,
it?
I can talk about bearded elves
Yeah,
next
we'll do
month.
that next month. Yeah, we can have time to research that. All right. Do you know exactly what line we left off?
Yeah. Although my phone is it died, so I had to plug
For,
it in.
Here
for
it is.
next
The
month,
notes are here.
Yes.
besides just bearded elves,
Yes.
can we talk about bearded dwarves as well? Like
Sure.
the
Beards in
females?
general. Yeah.
Yeah, the female dwarfs, I think.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
whole female dwarf thing. Do we want to throw in female ents in
That
that as
sounds
well?
good.
The Ent-wives?
Yeah,
Sounds good.
Because isn't that this next
Straight out
Tolkien
of Ross or not?
this next Tolkien move? We're going part of the theme is the Ent-wives.
Oh yeah, the
There's
your
a-
main
A search.
We
for
have
them.
search for the Ent-wives.
Okay, so the quote or
there isn't a
the,
whole lot to go on, unfortunately.
where we ended was the quote was.
So it'll
Now
be
the
beard
children
month
of the
next
this is
month.
where we start next time. Now the children of the Luvatar are elves and men. So we're 2/3 of the way through, and that's where it was. Now the children of the Luvatar are elves and men. And I did not bring
So
my
I had this bookmarked, but it looks like
Do we have another copy? I did not. I don't have really a copy to look at. I should have brought my
I have
copy.
2 battered soft copies.
You might be able to find it on your phone.
Let's see.
My phone's nearly dead.
But let me find my spot on.
All right, give it to me, and I will kill it to finish it off for you.
No, I was going to say mostly dead. There's only one thing you can do.
It's literally
You can give it
on.
a chocolate pill, right?
No.
Literally.
Yeah. No, I was thinking about the.
You said this is the
Mostly
opening
dead,
line?
all dead.
Oh, there it is. I found it.
Right,
Okay.
Princess Bride. Chocolate milk.
Let me. I've got two
Oh, I
battered
see.
soft
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
The chocolate makes it go down.
That's right.
Can I just stop the previous topic? Well, to be continued.
I just feel like
We're going to give you a red card.
they exaggerate and they eliminate subtle nuances.
You're right. I don't disagree with that.
It's just sad.
But I would say, unfortunately, that might be just part of when you render something from literature into cinema. I don't know how to get around that, really.
Yeah, even Tolkien himself said in his letters that his works are perfectly
I only
translatable
found one,
into a
but
visual medium.
Oh, thank you.
Try to be gentle.
clearly I have not been. All right, I'll start with the
You're saying
paragraph.
you
and then
ravished
pass
this
around.
book?
I think if we read straight through, this should take probably only about 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Now the children of Luvatar are elves and men, the firstborn and the followers. And amid all the splendors of the world, its vast halls and spaces, and its wheeling fires, Luvatar chose a place for their habitation in the deeps of time, and in the midst of the innumerable stars. And this habitation might seem a little thing to those who consider only the majesty of the Ainur, and not their terrible sharpness, as who should take the whole field of Arda for the foundation of a pillar, and so raise it, until the cone of its summit were mere bitter than a needle, or who consider only the immeasurable vastness of the world, which still the Ainur are shaping, and not the minute precision to which they shaped all things therein. But when the Ainur had beheld this habitation in a vision, and had seen the children of Iluvatar arise therein, then many of the most mighty among them bent all their thought and their desire towards that place. And of these Melkor was the chief, even as he was in the beginning, the greatest of the Ainur who took part in the music. And he feigned, even to himself at first, that he desired to go thither and order all things for the good of the children of Iluvatar, controlling the turmoils of the heat and the cold that had come to pass through him. But he desired rather to subdue to his will both elves and men, envying the gifts with which Iluvatar promised to endow them. And he wished himself to have subjects and servants, and to be called a lord, and to be a master over all other realms or other worlds.
You don't have to. It's challenge by choice. But if you want, otherwise just pass it on.
One long paragraph or two short ones.
Then pass it on.
Yep.
Okay.
I can do this.
But the other Ainur looked upon this habitation set within the vast spaces of the world, which the elves call Arda, the earth, and their hearts rejoiced in light, and their eyes, beholding many colors, were filled with gladness. But because of the roaring of the sea, they felt a great unquiet. And they observed the winds in the air, and the matters of which Arda was made, of iron and stone and silver and gold, and many substances. But of all these, water they most greatly praised. And it is said by the Eldar that in water there lives yet the echo of the music of the Ainur more than in any substance else that is in this earth. And many of the children of Iluvatar hearken still unsated to the voices of the sea, and yet know not what they listen. Now to water had that Ainu, whom the elves call Ulmo, turned his thought, and of all most deeply was he instructed by Iluvatar in music. But of the airs and winds, Manwë most had pondered, who is the noblest of the Ainur. Of the fabric of earth had Aule thought, to whom Iluvatar had given skill and knowledge scarce less than to Melkor. But the delight and pride of Aule is in the deed of making, and in the thing made, and neither in possession nor in his own mastery. Wherefore he gives and hoards not, and is free from care, passing ever on to some new work. And Iluvatar spoke to Ulmo and said, Seest thou not how here in this little realm, in the deeps of time, Melkor hath made war upon thy province? He hath bethought him of bitter cold immoderate, and yet hath not destroyed the beauty of thy fountains, nor of thy clear pools. Behold the snow and the cunning work of frost. Melkor hath devised heats and fire without restraint, and hath not dried up thy desire, nor utterly quelled the music of the sea. Behold rather the height and glory of the clouds, and the ever-changing mists, and listen to the fall of rain upon the earth. and in these clouds thou art drawn nearer to Manwë, thy friend whom thou lovest. Then Ulmo answered, Truly, wonders become now fairer than my heart imagined. Neither had my secret thought conceived the snowflake, nor in all my music was contained the falling of the rain. I will seek Manwë, that he and I may make melodies forever to thy delight. And Manwë and Ulmo have from the beginning been allied, and in all things have served most faithfully the purpose of Iluvatar.
Spoken by
I'll just do a
wise
sentence.
men on an island.
Oh,
Tolkien.
yes, Tolkien.
Do you want to discuss a little bit?
Make mental notes as you go. We want to try to wrap it up.
Okay.
The reading part, and then we can use the rest of the time for discussion.
But even as Elmo spoke, and while Ainur were yet gazing upon this vision, it was taken away and hidden from their sight. And it seemed to them that in that moment they perceived a new thing, darkness, which they had not known before except in thought. But they had become enamored of the beauty of the vision, engrossed in the unfolding of the world, which came there to being, and their minds were filled with it, for the history was incomplete, and circles of time not full wrought when the vision was taken away. And some have said that the vision ceased ere the fulfillment of the dominion of men and the fading of the firstborn, or the end of the third age. Wherefore, though the music is over all, the Valar have not seen as with sight the latter ages or the ending of the world. Then there was unrest among the Ainur, but Iluvatar called to them and said, I know the desire of your minds that ye have seen should verily be, not only in your thought, but even ye yourselves are, and yet other. Therefore I say, yeah, let these things be, and I will send forth into the void the flame imperishable, and it shall be at the heart of the world, and the world shall be, and those of you who that will may go down into it. And suddenly the Ainur saw afar off a light, as it were a cloud with a living heart to flame, and they knew that this was no vision only, but the Iluvatar had made a new thing, Ea, the world that is.
So E-H-A-H.
But I'm
We've been
American.
corrected by the Finns.
I'm American. I pronounce it however I want to, dang it.
I just feel like there's a little grunting going on.
I like Ea better, that flows better, but our Finnish friends said no, it's
Non-match.
Huh?
Non-match.
And I created a whole thing called RPG.
Oh, that was
So,
You sound like your
but I like
daughter
it
in
as
the
Ea RPG.
Yeah.
Never mind, sorry.
In Fantastic Beasts,
Tolkien has a
instead of muggles, they're called moon.
Alright. Thus,
Americans.
it came to pass that of the Ainur some abode still with the Iluvatar beyond the confines of the world. But others, and among them many of the greatest and most fair, took the leave of the Iluvatar and descended into it. But this condition Iluvatar made, or it is the necessity of their love, that their power should thenceforward be contained and bounded in the world, to be within it forever, until it is complete, so that they are its life and it is theirs. And therefore they are named the Valar, the powers of the world.
Greatest mind palace example right there. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of this as like the mind palace, as it were. The song creates the idea, and then it's actually brought about. It's so fascinating. Okay, I'm sorry, we're right.
What's the last paragraph here?
But when the Valar entered into Ea, they were at first astounded and at a loss, for it was as if naught was yet made, which they had seen in vision. And all was but on point to begin and yet unshaped, and it was dark. For the great music had been but the growth and flowering of thought in the timeless halls, and the vision only a foreshowing. But now they had entered in at the beginning of time, and the Valar perceived that the world had been but foreshadowed and foresung, and they must achieve it. So began their great labors in wastes unmeasured and unexplored, and in ages uncounted and forgotten, until in the deeps of time, and in the midst of vast halls of Ea, there came to be that hour and that place where it was made the habitation of the children of Iluvatar. And in this work the chief part was taken by Manwë and Aule and Ulmo. But Melkor too was there for the first, and he meddled in all that was done, turning it, if he might, to his own desires and purposes, and he kindled great fires. When therefore earth was yet young and full of flame, Melkor coveted it, and he said to the other Valar, "This shall be my own kingdom, and I name it unto myself." But Manwe was the brother of Melkor, and in the mind of Ilúvatar, and he was the chief instrument of the second theme that Ilúvatar had raised up against the discord of Melkor. And he called unto himself many spirits, both greater and less, and they came down into the fields of Arda and aided Manwe, lest Melkor should hinder the fulfillment of their labor forever, and earth should wither ere it flowered. And Manwe said unto Melkor, "This kingdom thou shalt not take for thine own wrongfully, for many others have labored here no less than thou." And there was strife between Melkor and the other Valar. And for that time Melkor withdrew and departed to other regions, and did there what he would, but he did not put the desire of the kingdom of Arda from his heart.
Now the Valar took to themselves shape and hue, and because they were drawn into the world by the love of the children of Ilúvatar, for whom they hoped, they took shape after the manner which they had beheld in the vision of Ilúvatar, save only in majesty and splendor. Moreover, their shape comes of their knowledge of the visible world, rather than of the world itself, and they need it not, save only as we use raiment, and yet we may be naked and suffer no loss of our being. Therefore the Valar may walk, if they will, unclad, and then even the Eldar cannot clearly perceive them, though they be present. But when they desire to clothe themselves, the Valar take upon them forms as of male and some as of female. For the difference of temper they had been given, the difference of temper they had even from their beginning, and it is but bodied forth in the choice of each, not made by the choice, even as with male and female may be shown by the raiment, but it is not made thereby. But the shapes wherein the great ones array themselves are not at all times like to the shapes of kings and queens of the children of Ilúvatar. For at times they may clothe themselves in their own thought, made visible in forms of majesty and dread.
Okay. And the Valar drew unto them many companions, some less, some well nigh as great as themselves. And they labored together in the ordering of the earth, and the curbing of its tumults. Then Melkor saw what was done, and the Valar walked on earth as powers visible, clad in the raiment of the world, and were lovely and glorious to see, all blissful, and that the earth was becoming as a garden for their delight, for its turmoils were subdued. His envy grew then the greater within him, and he took but visible form, but because of his mood and malice that burned in him, that form was dark and terrible. And he descended upon Arda in power and majesty greater than any other of the Valar, as a mountain that wades in the sea, and has its head above the clouds, and is clad in ice and crowned with smoke and fire. In the light, and the light of the eyes of Melkor was like a flame that withers with heat and pierces with a deadly cold. Thus began the first battle of the Valar with Melkor for the dominion of Arda. And of those tumults the elves know but little. For what has here been declared is come from the Valar themselves, with whom the Eldalai spoke in the land of Valinor, and by whom they were instructed, but little would the Valar ever tell of the wars before the coming of the elves. Yet it is told among the Eldar that the Valar endeavored ever in despite of Melkor, to rule the earth and to prepare it for the coming of the firstborn. And they built lands, and Melkor destroyed them. Valleys they delved, and Melkor raised them up. Mountains they carved, and Melkor threw them down. Seas they hollowed, and Melkor spilled them. And not might have
Just had to
peace,
be conquered.
peace or come to lasting growth. For as surely as the Valar began a labor, so would Melkor undo it or corrupt it.
So Melkor was just trolling them?
And yet their labor was not all in vain, and though nowhere and in no work was their will and purpose wholly fulfilled, and things were in hue and shape and other than the Valar had at first intended. Slowly, nonetheless, the earth was fashioned and made firm, and thus was the habitation of the children of Iluvatar established at last in the deeps of time and amidst the innumerable stars.
That meddlesome, I love how you use the word meddle. Meddlesome Melkor, so contrarian, like a sibling who just has to knock over everything that you build.
Yes.
And yet probably made it more varied and interesting by adding that chaos factor to
So
it.
you're saying he wasn't evil, he was just misunderstood?
I'm not saying one way or the other. So comments on that?
I found the section I read. I found that the language, because it was kind of archaic, a bit difficult to wade through.
Thus, most people never finish reading the Silmarillion.
Beyond that,
Well, no, I mean the tempos of it flow differently than what we're used to.
Yeah, well, it's much
Yeah, even-
more the high epic style.
Even compared to the rest of his work, he actually is, I think, on purpose here. Like you're saying, the high epic style
He
is
intentionally Homer, Iliad, Odyssey.
all storytellers would use the tone of the way they were speaking. Everyone would know whether it was going to be a ripping good yarn or if this is going to be about the beginning of the world.
you were so
World
American.
Sorry, well, it's
Ripping
true.
good yarn.
Yeah, I mean, is this going to be about Uncle Bob and how he, coming for Thanksgiving, or is this going to be about the genesis of all things?
Right.
Yeah, right. So it's interesting how they actually had different sorts of language they would use for this.
And he did it very intentionally. Definitely not by accident.
Why is that hard, though? Because Richard brought up a good point. Why is that often hard or less accessible now?
The cadence, the rhythm of the read is different.
He uses a lot of run-on sentences, and so cognitive neuroscience background, our brains can handle a plus or minus two. It's 7 plus or minus 2 chunks at a time before it starts to overload and have spill over and not be able to go from long-term to short-term and all that. So there's this whole chunking thing that limits the amount of information we can take in. Now, and everybody has a variance, like that's plus or minus 2. That's between anywhere from 5 to 9 chunks. A chunk can be a word, it can be a concept, it can be a set of words. And so a sentence, the average, especially here in the United States and elsewhere, our education systems have deteriorated in standards, right? We're not, the reading challenges that kids are given are a lot simpler than they were when we were kids. And watching my kids go through the same stuff at much later years. Their brains aren't trained to handle the larger chunks, if you will, of keeping. So what happens is you've got primacy, middle, and end, and most people can remember the beginning and the end, but lose track in the middle. And so they have to go back and reread the sentence to make sense of it, and people get very frustrated when they can't just keep reading. So then it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, if he's using the Iliad as a guide, he's probably using a translated English version.
Well, he's not going to use the Iliad as a guide directly. I was just throwing that out there as an example of the style. Because yes, that is a completely different language.
I'm speculating. It's a different language, and it probably flows better in Greek.
The postmodern era way of and modern era of dealing with with point of view is that we're dealing with what you call almost an omnipotent or objective point of view.
Omniscient third person.
Yeah, omniscient
Yeah.
third person,
Yeah.
which is not something that a lot of us read very often
Anymore. It used to be required
It used to
reading
be
and,
a big thing, but I don't think that as I was growing up that I remember reading any books with omniscient point of view as
when I went to private school, and so I got we definitely, like my ex-wife, she went to public school, I went to private school. Worlds of difference in the reading level that was expected to just pass a class just to get through the year. Not to mention, I was just once I started reading, I was a voracious reader on my own. But the baseline was we were reading the Iliad, the Odyssey, and all that like third, fourth grade. There were slightly tweaked versions of it, but we were made to read all of these things early on. Now they don't even teach it in high school anymore. Now you have to get that at college level. The Beowulf, like it was high school required reading. I was exposed to it in sixth grade, but it was required reading in high school. Mm-hmm. Now most of the high schoolers I talked to, because we worked with that age a lot, never read it, not required at all. Only if you took like AP English, maybe you got exposed to it. It's all college level, so it's all shifted up.
When you travel with one character and you kind of follow them along, and you know that's the only thing that you have, and you kind of experience it from that standpoint, and it's colored with their emotions and so forth. Yeah, it's very different than trying to this omniscient view.
Pulp Fiction versus
I think Hemingway would be a good example of kind of a turning point too, where you look at basically the 1920s and 30s. Really, what's valued? Punchy, direct, terse. Very
not flowery language. Monosyllabic rather than
so I think that's why I see a huge shift there in terms of modern writing, and so that's where it's just what we're used to. I would say.
Sure, modern language changes too.
Master and Commander was a movie that they made based on a series of a guy from the 1800s, Brian O'Brien, and the character Audrey was completely different. But the point is he wrote it for an 1800s audience.
Sure.
So his language was more convoluted. I could read it pretty easily, but for somebody else it might be a
right. Well, you certainly have generational difference too. Language changes and evolve as Tolkien makes the point of. I mean, that's the whole premise of his universe, is he needed a world to evolve his language in. H.P. Lovecraft, for example. So he was writing stories that were meant to be based usually around the 1920s or the 1890s, but he intentionally wrote them in an older 1800 style dialect often, because it was usually archaic, strange things. So he would often do it in an older, intentionally antiquated style of writing to evoke a mood and feeling. And I think this is totally intentional from Tolkien, and at the time was more accessible then than it is now.
I think he even recognizes that. I'm sorry.
No,
just like how he treats like Elven language. So the Sylvan elves would have had, I think, the idea that he kind of the Elvish that they spoke was much more very pragmatic, very just down to earth, as opposed to High Elvish, and recognizing he could see in his time, of course, looking at like say a lot of writers and authors, and would regularly quote. You try reading Les Mis in the original. It's I mean in English, but I mean without it being abridged. It's got French references. It's got Latin references. It's got this and that, and it doesn't translate it for you French, because it assumes that you have a working definition of something with basic.
Yeah.
So
that you have a classical education.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't have that anymore. So then that's where I think it's probably really useful that there are there's a growing body of different things that can help bridge that gap. Help people.
Look at Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Right? Very archaic language now for most people. You literally have entire classes just trying to help people understand what the heck he was saying, historical context and linguistic context, because some of the words have completely changed their meaning in the context that was originally used and where we are now. Or look at Beowulf, the evolution of that over time, how it was completely, very, barely recognizable in its evolution. Or Chaucer, yes. So yeah, we're going to have that evolution of and change of language, of course.
I think I
But
read.
Tolkien was intentionally making it older and
I think I read a
style.
fact that the English language changed sufficiently to be a new dialect about every 100 years or so.
Yeah.
So can I bring in a
Beyond,
different
please.
point, if you don't mind?
Please.
Well,
did you guys want to comment?
Yeah, please
before we
do.
move on?
I've been turning over the distinctions with the words that he uses for these characters, and I was kind of just curious. I don't remember now how it opens, but if it's supposed to be like music and then vision and then being, I was curious where the concept of language enters in, because it seems like Iluvatar is portrayed as speaking to his children, or rather the powers, the the Ainur, and then they become called the Valar when they're limited in their
when
necessity
they
of their
embed
love.
themselves in the world that is, right.
So it's like the language is sort of like a way to kind of track this transition from music to vision to being.
So the opening line from the Ainulindale: there was Eru the One, who in Arda is called Iluvatar, and he made first the Ainur, the Holy Ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music, and they sang before him, and he was glad.
Yeah.
So that's how that opens up.
That's vision to song to the making.
So it's really interesting, well, just how they're in turn sort of like the things that exist are associated with these powers of language or speech, but then they all sort of swirl around in this whole metaphor of music. It's just like a very rich dream.
Well, as we were kind of discussing last time, was the metaphor of music is interesting because music is more of an energy, it's a rhythm. It's not really connected to matter. I mean, matter vibrates obviously because of sound, but ultimately it's
more than sound.
The way it affects us is not by image association, but by something more primal, I guess you could say, or deeper, or whatever you want to call it.
The relationship between these three things is really fascinating. I think it would be worthwhile. I think we're getting close to 3, aren't we?
Yeah, it's 2:49.
Maybe next meeting, one of the things we could look at perhaps would be, just as an idea, is looking at, can we see in the Lord of the Rings, for example, some ways in which there may be hints of this kind of 3-part development. I don't know why, but I just thought of Gandalf. Maybe it was the cat. You have 3 names essentially for him. You have his true name in Valinor as one of the Astari. He was a Maya, and so he's there. I can't remember.
Aloran.
Was it Aloran?
Aloran.
And then you have, and then his Mithrandir to the elves, and the elves are like song. So you have vision, you have song, and then as his primary role in or agency in being an advocate of hobbits and a protector and eventual, in a sense, foil to Sauron or whatever. It's what he actually makes, or in this sense, prevents. And it's that I don't know. I wonder if we might be able to see some other ones. I don't want to overemphasize that, but it's interesting.
I've got a related question. Didn't he just never bother to announce his name to the elves, so they called him what translates into basically Greybeard? Isn't that the way it worked out?
He's got different names. He's got a name from the elves.
That'd be great for next. And so beards in Middle Earth.
Yes.
So
bearded
female dwarves, Entwives, elves and beards. More on this about the between thought and music and vision. All great topics there.
While we discuss some stylistic things, I do think that we should try to cover some of the content of what we just read. Hopefully, I mean, stylistically,
More
we
about
talked
Valar,
about
you mean?
what Olmo and their
Yeah,
relationship between Manwë and so on and so forth that we
We could
just
take
read.
start
together,
to
Corey,
discuss the different
take
Valar,
each one,
discuss them a little.
how they trace
Okay.
throughout
Well, the
the
Valar does Myra too.
Balrog.
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 The Balrog does Myra. He's
Yeah.
the same rank
Yeah.
as Gandalf, which is why he was so panicked.
Okay, so next time we'll we will discuss.
I'm gonna throw in a quick little clip. There's been a meme going around on the Middle Earth Facebook of the Sauron of many colors, and it's a cartoon of Sauron dressed up basically in the equivalent of the Technicolor Dreamcoat, Joseph and Technicolor Dreamcoat, kind of just fully just rainbow colored outfit. But really, to me, it just looks like what he was in the rotoscope version of Lord of the Rings.
That's
So,
what I was
that's pretty much that's what I thought.
I know, right?
And he does say it. And I'm Sauron of the many colors.
If you have to break a
But it's
thing
a
to
funny
find out what it
version
is,
going around.
Yeah, it's our
if you have to
disco
break a thing to find out what it
version.
is,
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so beards. Okay, and that's going to be elves and dwarf and women. Okay.
Elves and
and
bearded cats.
wives. And we should definitely be chiseling the end wives thing as we did up to Tolkien.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
It's always
Burning
in July, and it's the
Third
same
Saturday.
third weekend of the month. And right now we just do one day until we go back up to 3 days again. Well, it's it's a mixture. We do a mixture. Michael Martinez or other guests usually join us remotely. Again, when I get the budget again, we'll bring in more people.
the fact that men's
So that's our
speech
Patreon.
is not quite as sophisticated as
Yeah,
the
we just
Rolling
do
Stones
killer
were.
wall.
At some
I
point,
guess
right?
We had
So
T-shirts,
there's
and
almost
I
kind of
flew
a
in people from
degeneration
Germany.
that happens.
Oh, no, that was
I had like
some of
5
it. I'm
guest
not sure what it
speakers,
is.
one
That was
told
Grimton's
five.
idea. That was
Published
Grimton's
authors and magazines, everything.
And he was trying to be insulting.
He
Someday
was.
again.
There was
This
another
will be our
look
14th
here and did have another
Name
for
for
him.
it.
Small though it is, we're keeping it alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That was a pejorative kind of thing. Okay, so we'll talk about the beards and the genders and things. The 3 themes of the creation of art as they relate to the stories, and then also the Valar.
Yeah,
Kind
talk
of the
about the
hall
individual Vala and what their respective areas. That'll cover 2 sessions.
I also would like us to, if we can, to get back into letters next
Yes,
month.
yeah, I agree. I had that handy.
I mean, I think it was great.
No, we're supposed to
Good
always.
discussion.
Yeah. What page? What letter were we on?
I don't know. We'll have to look back at the notes.
Okay.
But if we keep it just to one letter,
Right.
and then from there we can go into what topics everybody has to bring,
I agree.
then maybe that we will be
Make
able
sure it
to
doesn't get missed.
There you go.
Yeah, because that's always been our tradition.
Yeah.
That's how we started.
Until we ran out.
We learned really fascinating things through those letters. So.
Well, thank you for everybody being here, and we're the more rich for having
Yes.
many people come. Thanks again, Anthony, for being here. Thanks, Wes and Stephanie, for coming back to us, and
Yes.
we're all
very glad
part of
to
this
have you.
together. And anybody who's
As a professional
online.
author, I'm
How did
glad
you guys
to
feel about
give
down
my
here?
weight to this proceeding.
How did you guys feel about down here? I know it's still
I
kind
felt
of
like the room was
chaos,
filled
but
with some-
as far as
Well, you were talking about giving us stickers and then you make us sit in this basement and everything. I mean,
Wait, I didn't
you're
get
a little
sticker.
confusing. Are you being out there with this, or
I want to get a sticker.
I think as the
Do
weather
you want a
gets
gold
better,
star, Brian?
we should go outside.
Well, we used to meet in coffee shops, and
Oh.
then one by one, the coffee shops
That's where I wandered.
got more and more crowded and more
That's why we don't
difficult
go there.
to use.
Sorry.
Yeah, we used to. We've
Well,
met. We
I'm a
went from coffee shop
professional
to coffee shop. If you guys want to meet at coffee shops again, because that's how we got. I mean, that's how some of the folks here. We were there at a coffee shop and they stumbled across us. So it's good to be visible that way. I have no problem with that. It's just finding a place that we can consistently get enough, because we fluctuate here from 3 to 15 people, but on an average of about 7 to 10. Consistently having a space we can use that isn't we can't hear each other.
Third Saturday in February is which of my
On a Saturday is always a challenge. But I would welcome being out in the public again rather than in my house. But I'm happy to do it to keep it going. But yeah, we've been at half a dozen coffee shops since 2005. So it's the service station was great for a long time, but now they're not open to the general public for most of the time.
with Valentine's Day, should
Thank you.
with Valentine's Day coming up, should you make a plug for the last Christopher Tolkien book that was published as it's coming up, because we're not going to be here for.
Yeah. So for those who haven't read the Lay of Luthien, in the Silmarillion, which is one of the versions that's out there, it's put together from sources that are already out there that people may know, but Beren and Luthien was the last published work of Christopher Tolkien. He says it's his last. we don't know, but it is the last one that he has actually put out there, and it may be, since he's now very old, but a great, not only a great story, probably I would say the greatest romance that exists in English literature, in my opinion.
And Tolkien and his wife's tombstone.
A tribute to his parents as well, and their relationship. So very strong, good marriage, and
their live Beren.
Yeah. So it's good. The next meeting will be on February 17th.
February 17th. Okay. And if any of you prefer another location, I was asking the service station, or not, the Spark Central. Like, what about having Tolkien Society there? But it might be a little too esoteric. But I don't know. We would welcome. I'd be open to that. But if we want to try to keep our schedule consistent, that really helps.
Calling me esoteric?
You know what we really need is one of those places that they used to have where the guys sat around, smoked cigars, and drank alcohol while they were in front of those hot fireplaces,
those
you want to go to a bar on your own?
I didn't say a bar. I was talking about something completely different.
Did you look into Bellwether?
Yes, I did.
So Hawk and I, it's our own fault. So
Did you go?
we were going to.
We
weren't able to kind of sync
People
our
got
schedules.
sick.
It's okay.
So we're still looking at that.
Okay.
We're looking forward to that.
I think it would be.
Does it have good ambiance?
Yes. And there's one really big table.
Okay.
Ooh, that's nice.
It's not like giant, but it's.
Do you think
big
we can
enough
record
for
there? Do you think we'd mind?
I don't think they'd mind.
Okay. Especially if
They're
we like.
really chill there, and I don't think.
Most places have been okay with that. I haven't had any location say no, you can't broadcast from there.
And early afternoon on Saturday, I don't think.
Only
it's
problem
too
is
big.
if I have strong enough signal, like sometimes it gets cell phone.
As long as we don't bring our smoking pipes.
Built-in cage?
Right. Garland, yeah.
Got a bit of the weed.
Which is where I go for the ASL group right after this is down.
I know. Like, kids make so many jokes about that.
But yeah, we definitely want to check that out.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I don't know if anybody's seen, but of course you've had it for quite a while. But anyway, just the cover of Erebor. This is the One Ring. Yes, go ahead. Just again, that's I think a John Howe cover. I think they had John Howe do the cover for this one, but they have other artists who do the inside of the book. But it's a One Ring role playing. It's a module, but it's really background information.
Yeah, cover art by John Howe.
So it's very well
light.
All about
the lighting.
Lonely Mountain.
I'm sorry, John Howe is
bad lighting.
I have a couple of calendars that are
Which we have on Other Minds magazine. Howe and so there's the two main artists, Howe and
you're thinking of
Lee.
The consultants of the movie.
So they like Other Minds magazine. They'd let us do that on our magazine issues. So we have a lot of their art with permission. I think issue 17's in the works right now.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're familiar with Other Minds magazine. Were you familiar with it?
What?
Other Minds magazine.
No.
So it's the journal I put together back in 05, and it's all things Tolkien and Tolkien gaming. So it overlaps both. Yeah. So some of it's, overall it's a gaming theme, but a lot of stuff has nothing. If you're a non-gamer, but you're a Tolkien fan, great material, and it doesn't have anything gaming specific. So. And they're freely available on other minds.
John Howe's the artist.
OMZ.org.
I have a couple of calendars by him.
Yeah.
Corey, can you hand me the summary?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Hawk, for the fundraising stuff,
Yes.
those stickers that you were talking about might be a good prize to give away for donors.
Okay,
Or like
bumper stickers? Or?
calendars.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
If you want to think of something.
Yeah, good ideas.
I could.
Yeah, a little incentive. Okay. We can let's talk about
Yeah,
that next
other
month. I'll get
ideas
the
about
account
that.
set up.
That's
Draw
end
that
of
up.
my list of
No, that's great. Well, I'll get the account set up. We'll do that first. And then next month we can talk about different ways, because what you do is create reward levels and goals. So you have overall goals that you're trying to reach, and then you have reward levels for supporters. So at the different levels they support you, they get different goodies or whatever, better features. So those are the two things we'll have to come up with.
Well, I might have a couple of items that I could throw in there.
So let's brainstorm that next month as well, or even on our website, or we've got a Discord chat server now in addition to our old IRC. If you go to our website tolkienscholars.org, you can see the link right there to the Discord server. That's the new modern chat that people are into.
It's actually kind of buckling under the load a little bit.
Is it? I'm having trouble with my 12 other servers I'm running.
Are we
We're still live.
Okay.
We're about to hit 3 o'clock.
Okay.
So,
we are 3 o'clock.
okay. All right. All right. Well, thank you so much, and thank you. And feel free to email us tolkienscholars@gmail.com, and our website is tolkienscholars.org. Where you may be well. Namarie.
Sorry, I had such an email soon.
I've got to go home.